I used to think love was enough to sustain a marriage, that a few promises spoken under soft lights and a handful of years together could carry two people through anything. But promises don't wash dishes or hold you close when the nights get long or stop the silence from creeping between two people who once couldn't bear to be apart. David, my husband, is a good man. No one who knows him would say otherwise. He is dependable, responsible, and respected in his work. But being a good man doesn't always mean being a present one. Lately, it feels like he belongs more to his office than to me. His suitcase is always half-packed, his phone always buzzing, and his eyes always scanning something other than my face. I don't blame him, not entirely. He works hard because he wants a good life for us. Still, a house without laughter feels like a museum of what used to be. I find myself cooking dinners that go cold, folding laundry alone, and sleeping on a bed that feels bigger than it used to. The small absences pile up, and suddenly I realize I've become lonely in my own marriage. That's when Mark reappeared. Mark had been David's close friend since their college days. They used to call him the extra brother because he was always around, even during holidays. He was charming in a way that seemed effortless, funny without trying, confident without arrogance. When he walked into a room, people noticed. Over time, I had gotten used to him being part of our lives. But he'd faded into the background once David's work picked up and our social circle shrank. Lately, though, he'd been visiting more often, sometimes to check in on the house when David traveled, sometimes just to make sure I wasn't bored. At first, I welcomed the company. He had a way of filling the silence, telling stories that made me laugh in ways I hadn't in months. But then I started to notice things I couldn't ignore. The way his eyes lingered on me a little too long when I was speaking. The way his hand brushed against mine when he passed me a glass. The way his compliments came wrapped in a tone that felt heavier than friendly banter. One evening, while David was away on a week-long business trip, Mark dropped by unannounced. "Just making sure you're not losing your mind alone in this big place," he joked as he stepped inside. I smiled politely, but my heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but something I didn't want to name. We sat in the living room, a movie playing faintly on the TV, though neither of us really watched it. He asked about my day, my week, my plans. His questions felt personal, attentive, and for a moment I let myself bask in the warmth of being seen. Then came the small shifts. His hand rested on the back of the couch, close enough that I could feel the heat of it. His laugh carried a softness, his eyes locked onto mine a fraction too long. I told myself it was harmless, that I was imagining it, that I knew better. But deep down, the boundaries already felt blurred. When the evening wound down, I stood to say goodnight. He leaned against the doorway, his smile tinged with something unspoken. "You know," he said quietly, "David's lucky. You deserve more of his time than he gives you." The words sank like a stone in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to protest, to defend David, to dismiss the comment. Instead, I stood frozen, my throat dry. Mark's eyes studied me carefully, as if waiting for me to break. Finally managed a weak smile, muttered something about being fine, and closed the door behind him. But long after he left, the echo of his words lingered. You deserve more of his time. Lying in bed that night, I tried to push the thought away. I told myself it was meaningless, just words tossed in the air by a man too bold for his own good. But my body betrayed me. My pulse quickened at the memory of his gaze. My skin tingled where his presence had been too close. I whispered into the darkness, as though to convince myself, I love David, that's all that matters. But love doesn't erase loneliness. And loneliness has a way of making even the wrong kind of attention feel like oxygen. Asterisk. The next few days passed in uneasy silence. I tried to bury myself in chores and reading and anything that kept my mind from drifting back to that night. But the truth was inescapable. Mark's words had planted a seed I couldn't stop watering with my thoughts. Every time I picked up my phone, part of me expected a message from him. Every time I heard footsteps outside, I wondered if he would show up again. When David called to check in, I answered with practiced cheerfulness. I asked about his meetings, his flights, his deadlines. He told me he missed me, but his voice was distracted, rushed. Before I could even respond, he ended with a quick love you and hung up. I stared at the empty line, my chest hollow. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't notice. Mark noticed. 2 evenings later, he was back. This time, he texted before arriving, passing by. Should I stop in? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I knew what the right answer was. I should have said no. I should have told him this wasn't appropriate, but the loneliness pressed down too hard, and before I could stop myself, I typed, sure, just for a little while. When he arrived, the house felt different, quieter yet charged with a tension I couldn't quite name. He carried a bottle of wine and a grin that unsettled me more than comforted me. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping slowly. The conversation began as always light, casual, full of laughter. But soon it shifted. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. His attention felt intoxicating, like sunlight after too many days of rain. At one point, I reached across to take my glass, and his hand brushed mine. This time, neither of us pulled away. His fingers lingered, warm against my skin. I whispered, almost instinctively, Mark. A warning, a plea, a whisper of resistance, but he only leaned closer. You don't have to pretend you don't feel this, he murmured. The room seemed to shrink. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, filling the silence between us. I should have stood up, told him to leave, closed the door behind him. Instead, I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. When his hand slid gently over mine, I whispered again, softer this time, stop. My voice trembled, weak and uncertain, but my body stayed still, betraying me. He searched my eyes, as if looking for a final refusal, and when I didn't give it, he closed the space between us. His nearness was overwhelming, his scent, his warmth, the undeniable gravity pulling me in. I told myself I didn't want this. I told myself it was wrong. But the loneliness I had carried for so long screamed louder than my conscience. In that moment, it wasn't about Mark. It wasn't even about desire. It was about being noticed, being wanted, being alive again. The betrayal unfolded in silence, not with grand declarations, but with small surrenders. My whispered protests grew fainter until they faded altogether. I let the moment swallow me, knowing full well the cost. Afterward, the room felt heavy. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands trembling. Mark leaned back casually, as though what had just happened was inevitable. As though nothing had broken. You're not alone, Lena, he said quietly, almost gently, but I felt more alone than ever. When he finally left, the silence in the house pressed down harder than before. I sat in the dark, my mind replaying every second, my chest tightening with guilt. I had whispered stop. I had known it was wrong, and yet I hadn't pulled away. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. David's side of the bed was empty, as always when he traveled. Only now, the emptiness was different. It wasn't just his absence I felt, it was the weight of what I had done. The house that had once been a lonely place now felt like a prison. Every shadow seemed to whisper my guilt. Every creak of the floorboards echoed my silence. I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time slip. But deep down, I knew better. Mistakes don't happen twice. Mistakes don't feel this deliberate. I pressed my face into the pillow, whispering into the darkness, why didn't I fight harder? But the darkness had no answer. Only the heavy truth remained. A line had been crossed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Morning light spilled through the curtains, harsh and unforgiving. I woke with the same weight in my chest I had felt all night. My reflection in the mirror startled me, my face pale, my eyes restless, as though I had aged years in a matter of hours. David called just after breakfast. His voice was cheerful, exhausted, full of the usual travel details. "I'll be home in 2 days," he said. I tried to match his tone, but my throat tightened around every word. I couldn't stop hearing Mark's voice in the back of my head, the memory of his closeness replaying like a scene I couldn't erase. When the call ended, I stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the phone. My hands trembled. I wanted to confess, to scream, to beg for forgiveness, but how could I? One truth would destroy everything we had built. And yet keeping it buried felt like carrying a stone too heavy for my chest. Mark, on the other hand, acted as though nothing had changed. The next day, he sent a simple message. "How are you feeling?" I stared at it for an hour before deleting it without replying. The audacity of his calmness enraged me, but beneath that anger was something darker, an ache that part of me didn't want to let go of. That night, I cooked dinner as usual, even though the table was empty. I poured wine into 2 glasses out of habit, then laughed bitterly at myself. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. My home was no longer just mine and David's. It had become a stage for betrayal, a place where silence carried secrets too loud to ignore. When David finally returned, his hug was warm, his smile tired but genuine. He carried his suitcase upstairs, telling me about the flight, the meetings, the clients. I nodded in all the right places, smiled when I was supposed to, but inside, my stomach churned. Every touch, every kiss hello felt like a lie I was too cowardly to confess. That night in bed, I lay stiff beside him. He drifted quickly into sleep, but I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding with guilt. I thought of how I had whispered, "Stop," to Mark, how weak it sounded, how empty it felt. Was it really resistance, or had it been a performance to ease my conscience? The days blurred together, heavy with unspoken truths. Every time Mark's name flashed across my phone, I deleted it instantly, terrified David might see. And yet, every time I erased his messages, my heart ached in strange rebellion. I began avoiding mirrors. I couldn't stand the sight of myself, the woman who had once believed she was strong, loyal, faithful. Now, I saw only a stranger, a woman whose silence had betrayed her more deeply than Mark's touch ever could. Weeks passed. David never noticed the shift in me, or perhaps he chose not to. He was busy again, traveling, working late, answering emails during dinner. I told myself this distance was proof that my betrayal didn't matter, that if he truly cared, he would have seen through me by now. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about him. It was about me. I started writing in a journal late at night, spilling out the words I could never speak aloud. I wrote about loneliness, about silence, about choices I could never undo. I wrote about the sound of my own whisper, "Stop," and how hollow it had been. And every page felt like a confession to myself, even if no one else would ever write it. Mark stopped reaching out after a while. The silence between us grew, but instead of relief, I felt an emptiness sharper than before. It wasn't love. It wasn't even desire. It was something darker, a reminder of how fragile I had been, how quickly I had crumbled when the right pressure was applied. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen watching David eat dinner, I realized the truth. The betrayal wasn't just an act, it was a fracture that had cut through me. Whether or not David ever found out, the damage had already been done. I will carry it quietly, I will smile when I must cook meals, wash clothes, play the role I promised to play, but inside I know I've changed. Something has shifted permanently, and no amount of love or loyalty can reset it. The story doesn't end with a dramatic confrontation, or with forgiveness, or with exposure. It ends in silence, the same silence where it began. And in that silence, one memory lingers above all: the sound of my own voice whispering stop, too softly to be heard, too softly to save me.